Ever since Berserk began, the one question on every reader's mind has been how exactly does one deal with the God Hand? They've been, and we're not exaggerating here, pretty unbeatable since they were introduced. Guts spent 2 whole years just trying to track them down, and when he did, he couldn't lay a finger on them, much less kill one of them. But a lot of things have changed since the Black Swordsman Arc took place in the timeline, and that got us thinking. What if the God Hand does get killed? What will happen to the world if that happens? Well, we're going to answer those questions and more in this video, so put your spoiler caps on, because this ride is going to be stormy. Let's find out how a god's death can change the world of Berserk. Why the God Hand can't be killed the way you think. Okay, so we know what the title of this video is, but here's the thing. The God Hand can't really be killed the way you think. That's because the God Hand doesn't exist, at least not in a physical sense. As denizens of the astral world, the God Hand technically is a huge body of thought. It's a group of human emotions that's so intense, it's manifested itself as an aspect of demon kind. Griffith is called the King of Longing because that's what's got him into the mess that was his imprisonment. The heart longs for what it wants, but to burn everything else when it doesn't get it isn't a natural response, it's madness. The God Hand is madness personified, and you can't really kill the madness inside of a person, just the person themselves. Most astral beings can't even be summoned so easily anymore, mostly because the current world of Berserk was way too disconnected from spirituality for close to 1,000 years. You can't invoke the presence of a river spirit to help you douse a fire if you don't even believe that it exists, and so the use of magic became restricted to a handful of mages, like the ones from Elfhelm, Flora, and Shirke, and the Kushan Empire's magical unit under the command of Daiba. That's a pretty insignificant proportion when you consider the entire population of the Earth, and even among them, no one really knows what the God Hand are. On a spiritual level, they're the executors of the will of something much larger than themselves that lurks within the deepest layers of the astral world. They used to be humans, but by making terrible sacrifices to the darkness, they transcended their mortal coil and became immortal deities. And when we say that they shed their mortal coil, we do mean that literally. You see, normally, in order to become connected to the power of evil, a person would use a behelit. All apostles use behelits to obtain their proper forms, but the power they receive is a tiny fraction of the infinite swells of the abyss. Apostles still exist and operate within the physical world, with the fissure in their hearts being the only real link to the astral world. But that's because they use regular behelits to obtain their forms. The God Hand uses the Crimson Behelit to become the God Hand, and for a long time, we wondered what was so special about it. Well, we think we figured it out, and by it, we mean why only the God Hand is destined to use it. While apostles receive a fraction of the power of evil to exercise in the mortal world, the God Hand doesn't exist in the mortal world. They exist within the darkest depths of the astral world, concentrations of concepts that lurk within the deepest recesses of the human mind. In order to become a concept, one has to lose their humanity, and that's what the Crimson Behelit acts as a vehicle for. Instead of linking a human being's soul to the abyss, it subsumes them within it, leaving no trace of their mortal existence in the world. We get proof of this during Griffith's eclipse. When he utters the sacrificial chant, his physical body gets balled up in an unbreakable cocoon while his soul descends to the depths of the astral world. When he accepts the deal to become a God Hand, his body transformation is complete and he goes from being physical to metaphysical. Now, there's really only one way to get a hold of the God Hand, and that's by being destined to become an apostle. They only show themselves to the ones chosen to serve them and the will of their god when a behelit is activated and an interstice opens up. The only people that can get to the God Hand are the apostles and their intended sacrifices, which makes getting to them impossible for someone like Guts. And the fact that those sacrifices usually die before they can even figure out what's happening to them makes them useless in the face of the God Hand. Yes, Guts was able to see them again during the Black Swordsman Arc, but that's because he somehow managed to be at the right place at the right time. During his battle with Slugcount, the Apostle managed to reactivate his behelit and pull everyone in his vicinity into the interstice, which allowed Guts to see the God Hand for the first time in 2 years. Of course, everything he tried to kill them failed spectacularly, and he himself very nearly passed away, but you get the point now, we think. How can you kill a thought, or a feeling, or something so fleeting as emotion? You can't, and even if you do manage to pin it down, it's not like they aren't going to resist. The oldest magicians in the world haven't figured them out. Even the ones that practice evil magic like Daiba know just when to pull back and how much. So if you can't find them and you can't kill them, what can you do? Nothing is the answer that comes to mind first, but that might not be entirely correct. How one might be able to kill a god hand. In the beginning, we're shown that there is absolutely no way that a human could ever hope to match up to the god hand when an inhuman hunter couldn't. The only person that's come even close to tracking them is Skull Knight, and the way he does that is by searching for temporal junction points, moments in time where an interstice connected to the depths of the astral world appears, or when the god hand makes their presence known overtly. At every temporal junction, he's interfered and tried his best to scuffle their plans, but so far he's been rather unsuccessful. That's because even though Skull Knight can find the god hand, the time frame within which he can act meaningfully is extremely small, and he just doesn't have the right tools to get the job done. His blade is perfect for killing apostles. Hell, he's chopped thousands of them into bits and pieces over the centuries that he's existed. But as good as it is, it still can't cut a thought or harm a feeling. And even if it could, it needs to find its target first. When Skull Knight invaded Griffith's Eclipse, his first move was to attack Void, but Void simply opened a spatial portal and sent his sword right back at him. The rest of the God Hand didn't get involved, but they didn't need to. That one exchange told Skull Knight all he needed to know about how good his chances of forcing a fight in that moment were. He gambled on Femto's recent birth and unfamiliarity with his powers to rescue Guts and Casca instead of sticking around and indulging his own vengeance, because he could have done that just as easily. Skull Knight could have ignored Guts and Casca altogether, but he didn't, because he was ultimately fighting for the greater good. His life's goal is to bring down the God Hand, so he's the only person that has any sort of insight into how that can be done. His solution is to send them back to where they were created and leaving them trapped there for an eternity, which is why he creates the Sword of Actuation. This blade, which is just his normal blade coated in numerous behelits, harnesses the same kind of spatial power that Void uses. A single cut from this blade opens a portal in space itself, and Skull Knight can control where he wants this portal to teleport its targets to. He used it to rescue Guts from a collapsing dimension one time, demonstrating its rescue and recon abilities, but the real reason it was made was to entomb the God Hand within the vortex that made them. Behelits are intrinsically connected to their birthplace. They're powered by the Abyss and are the only way that you can even reach it in the first place. Skull Knight basically reverse-engineered that process to create a one-way ticket to the Vortex of Souls for anything that gets caught in the crossfire of his sword, but that's just it. He has to hit his target. If it was just about fighting and binding apostles to the Abyss, then we'd have no story to tell, because Skull Knight is easily faster than every living apostle. He's faster than Zod in close quarters combat, and not a lot of people can say that and actually mean it. But being fast isn't his problem, it's being predictable. Over the years, Skull Knight has established a pattern whereby he pops up at every temporal junction with the same goal in mind: to eliminate the God Hand. He never succeeds, but it makes anticipating him a hell of a lot easier, and that's exactly what happens when Skull Knight goes to use the Sword of Actuation on a proper target. Femto anticipates his moves, uses his own spatial powers to manipulate the portal, and triggers a merger of the physical and astral worlds that basically turns him into a proper god. Skull Knight's predictability leaves him wide open to intervention, so if the Sword of Actuation is the only thing that can defeat the God Hand, like he believes it to be, then the person wielding it has to be a complete outlier to the path that causality has laid out for the world. All God Hand members aren't as omniscient as people believe them to be, especially because they themselves admit this flaw. Slan, Ubik, and Conrad, all of them have expressed utter disbelief at the way Guts has defied destiny and managed to survive this long. But in gamer terminology, that's just a skill issue. Femto was able to anticipate Skull Knight's moves, and Void always looks like he actually is omniscient and knows exactly how every interaction needs to play out, which is why he doesn't intervene, even during moments where things seem to be going off plan. Finding a person that lies outside the causal current, especially at this stage in the story, is going to be extremely difficult. Most people, including Guts and Skull Knight, are all a part of the grand scheme of causality, no matter how many little shows of resistance they're capable of putting on. Guts is tethered to the Abyss as a sacrifice, his every step literally haunted by the malign spirits of the dead, and his greatest goal is to find and kill the entire God Hand, with extreme prejudice. Magicians are also a no-go, because the God Hand specifically targets mages once they gain a solid foothold in the physical world. Their presence would be much easier to detect, and as practitioners of the arcane, they know a thing or two about walking their path in life and not straying from it. In fact, pretty much the only character that has shown complete unpredictability in the face of the Demon Kings is Rickard, when he slapped Griffith across the face. That brings us to the second method by which one could put the God Hand down, and that's by giving them a body of flesh. Apostles all have bodies of flesh that are powered by evil and the souls of those they've sacrificed. Once they're killed, their souls are sucked into the abyss while their physical bodies are left behind. The God Hand doesn't possess physical bodies, and their links to the abyss are powered by a far greater number of souls, so this option isn't valid at all unless one of them gets a physical body for some reason. And, well, it turns out that's exactly what Femto gets at the end of the Conviction arc. Once Griffith becomes a God Hand, it starts a prophecy that would culminate in the world changing in such a way that the God Hand's need for subtle influence would be eliminated. Their powers were immense, so immense that even mages like Flora wouldn't want to face them in a fight. But because they could only become active when a Behelit was involved, that limited their actual influence in the world. They could manipulate the psyche and make people do things associated with the intense desires they represented, but they couldn't get the proverbial ball rolling themselves. 1,000 years of painstaking planning and patience had finally given them everything they needed to make their dreams come true, and the key to that was Griffith. The God Hand manipulated events in such a way that they created a massive concentration of desperate people filled with despair at a place that was filled with the malign spirits of the dead. Once things hit critical mass thanks to Guts and Casca's brand of sacrifice, a ritual was triggered and the spirits turned into the blood flow of the dead, which consumed most living things in sight and basically replicated the eclipse, but in the physical world. Femto was Griffith again, and he had a body of flesh to harm. What's more is he got a weakness built into his body because of the way he was incarnated, because his vessel decided to show mercy and swallow the dying demon child, thereby unintentionally fusing it with Griffith. This merger causes Griffith to transform into the Moonlight Boy every night of the full moon and travel to the demon child's mother, Casca, until the night is ended. He returns to his post in the morning, remembering only a fleeting memory of the night before, but as the child, he's definitely more vulnerable than when he's in control. When Griffith's in charge of his body, he's untouchable, and we do mean that literally. In his first military campaign, he was able to phase through multiple arrow volleys like he was the Flash, and he's been untouched in battle ever since. In truth, he probably uses his spatial powers to create a force field around him that causes all weapons to be diverted around it, but to the naked eye, that's not at all apparent. Guts couldn't land a single blow on him in what was pretty close to point-blank range, and whenever people try to come for Griffith, they just keep missing. So the best way to kill him would be to kill the Moonlight Boy at its most vulnerable, but doing that doesn't stop the entire God Hand. That would still leave the other four, and they don't have physical bodies that we know of yet. In chapter 306, we saw Void, Slan, Ubik, and Conrad manifesting in the world thanks to the Great Roar, but they looked like they were still floating pretty much formless within the layers of the astral world that suited their desires the most. If this means they can't act as much as Griffith can, then maybe trapping them with the Sword of Actuation before going for the big boss fight is the best course of action that Team Guts can take. Not that we think things are going to be that simple, the God Hand are literal deity-level threats, and Void has a power that directly conflicts Skull Knight's signature weapon. But let's just say that Rickert somehow manages to use the sword on all 5 God Hand members before they destroy the world or send all human souls to hell. Or maybe he gets the Formless Four with the help of the Kushan while Guts and the rest take care of Griffith personally. Killing a God Hand member will have a far worse fallout than just one damned soul being dragged to hell from the inside. Right now, Griffith is in command of most, if not all, apostles in the world. For Guts' team to even get to him using a head-on approach, they'd have to slaughter scores of apostles first. Then they'd have to kill Griffith, and the best time to do that would be when he was being controlled by the soul of Guts' son. Call it dark, but we don't know if committing such a sinful act should come last, given that the smarter thing would be carrying out an assassination and fending off apostles until they hit a life-ending ambush point. Nightmare scenarios aside, we think that if the other God Hand members are indeed formless at the moment, then the best course of action would be to keep them that way long enough for Skull Knight to trap them in the vortex of souls. That is much easier said than done because Slan's last manifestation nearly killed both him and Guts. If he hadn't started working on the Sword of Actuation, they'd have died and lost to a partial manifestation created through troll entrails. The only weapons that have the kind of juice to take out God Hand members are Skull Knight's blade and also Dragon Slayer, because it did deliver the blow that forced Slan to dispel her advent. Dragon Slayer is the only human weapon that's capable of killing astral creatures, and it harms them on both a physical and astral level, much like an attack from a God Hand member. So if everything works out and Guts doesn't go crazy, and we do actually see the good guys take out the evil God Hand, what happens then? The scenarios we've described are nowhere near to what might happen in the series, but some of these events could take the path we think they're going to take. The absolute best case scenario is what we're talking about here, so what happens if that comes to pass? What happens if a god hand dies? Is a god hand necessary to keep the world spinning? Killing a god hand is very similar to killing a force of nature, except you'd be killing what we like to call an emotional nexus. Void and the rest call Griffith the blessed king of longing. It's true that longing is what Griffith's entire life has been all about. He's longed for the throne, he's longed for friends, he's longed for power, he's longed for love, as weird as it feels saying that. The God Hand feels like a mix of the four horsemen and some other things that are commonly seen as sins. The horsemen represent war, famine, pestilence, and death. This is sometimes swapped out for conquest, but you can see where we're going with this one. Conrad's the embodiment of pestilence, and his plagues ravage lands. Griffith is war and conquest combined in his intentions. All God Hand members offer death, and Slan and Ubik represent lust and deception respectively. Is it possible that if these five died, the world would be rid of these emotions altogether, and humanity could evolve to a closer understanding of a genuine utopia? Without madness-inducing lust, plagues and pestilence, deception and dread, war and chaos, the world would finally be at peace. The God Hand is using death as a weapon and powering the vortex of souls by manipulating people into thinking they're going to heaven when they're actually hellbound. But if they're killed, would hell disappear? It's possible that it might be reduced to a shell of its former self. It's possible that the physical and astral worlds will never unmerge, and so if the God Hand is killed, the abyss disappears entirely. But even if the representations of these terrible thoughts and feelings are wiped out of existence, it won't remove those thoughts and feelings from the subconscious of humanity itself. It is human to feel lusty. It's human to want to get your way. It's human to be so angry you actually get sick because of it. And it's human to crave salvation. By killing the God Hand, Guts and his crew won't remove these feelings from their fellow humans, but they will give them a deeper sense of understanding and acceptance. Because the truth is, there was a world where the God Hand didn't exist, and in that world, a man called Berserk rose to become king of all mankind. Berserk made a lot of mistakes in his journey, many of which eventually informed the God Hand's composition, but he did that way before they existed. People will be the way they are, and it's accepting that will break the cycle of fate. Yes, the erasure of the God Hand will restore a sense of free will to society, but it won't break the world as it would if you killed, say, one of the four elemental kings. Each of those kings represents a direction and a fundamental element of the universe, which means that if one of them dies, a building block of existence dies with them. So we're confident that the world won't stop spinning if the God Hand is killed, and neither will Earth turn into Elysium, all pure and noble and honorable. Vices will continue to exist, but perhaps the world will become a place where men believe in themselves as being their shot at salvation. The point of Berserk and Guts' journey is to believe in the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. Guts has done the impossible, wielded the impossible, fought the impossible, killed the impossible time and time again. He's the definition of the human desire to follow your own path in life, consequences be damned and pleasures be praised, for all experience makes us who we are. Perhaps once their evil shepherds are gone, people will realize the gift that life is and do with it what they should have been doing for 1,000 years, instead of kneeling in front of an idol inspired by the likeness of the bringer of darkness. The God Hand's death will surely free the world of the cycle of fate, but destiny will then become a responsibility for humans to bear. And whether they'll come through on that test will be extremely interesting to see. Marvelous verdict! And that's it for this video, but we want to hear what you think will happen when the God Hand dies, and if they can die at all, down in the comments. This is Wizard Wheezy signing off for now, but don't forget, keep on struggling, strugglers.